Thank you. Perfect. Okay, so the next step of this meeting is the land heritage statement. Sean, would you read the statement, please?
Sure, thank you, Rita. Let's see here. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including Odawa, Ojibwe, and Badewatmi, and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained, generally in unconscionable ways, from indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
Thank you. I'd now like you, Sean, to call the roll, please.
Yes, just 1 second. I'm going to promote Councilmember Dish to panelist.
Great.
All right. Councilmember Ackman.
Here, Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Vice Chairperson Brown.
Present in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Callawart.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Curtis.
Here, Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Dale.
Present in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Councilmember Dish.
Here in Chicago.
Thank you. Commissioner Graham. All right. Commissioner Gruber.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Marson.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Mirsky.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Chairperson Mitchell.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Nedrich. All right. And Commissioner Wayhing. All right. And that is the quorum.
All right, thank you. Our next order of business is approval of the agenda. May I hear a motion to approve? Councilmember Ackman, and a second.
A second.
Thanks, Commissioner Gruber. All in favor, say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
Thank you. Looks like we're going to go on this agenda. Thank you. Our next order of business is public comment, the first public comment of this meeting. And this is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call the number I said earlier, which is 877-853-5247, and enter meeting ID 922-9696-1644. And once you have entered, you will be queued to, you will be muted, but you can raise your hand by, which one is it, Sean? Is it star
9.
Star 9 to raise your hand if you wish to speak. Is there anyone who wishes to speak?
We do not have anyone on the line currently.
All right, thank you. Then let's move forward with our business. So this is a working session of the Environmental Commission, and it's meant to be a more informal kind of meeting. So you'll see that we are not approving minutes from our prior meeting. That will happen at the next meeting in July. And so the goal is to have an informal discussion, mostly of the work groups, but maybe some additional issues that may raise as we have our discussions. And I want to kick it off with something that is on our kind of the charge of the Environmental Commission. And I was looking it over, and the Environmental Commission is supposed to advise and make recommendations to the city and city council and the city administrator on environmental policy, environmental issues, and environmental implications for all city programs and proposals on the air, water, land, and public health. Duties for us include public hearings on environmental issues and concerns, and publishing and presenting an annual report on the city's state of the environment. And when I saw that, I thought, maybe we should talk about the annual state of the environment report. And I believe that we have skipped it for at least the last year, and that it might be a time for us to consider it and have a discussion of the kinds of things that we might include in a report on the state of the environment, and also whether we all agree that such a report would be a good idea. So that's my kickoff. And I'm sorry I didn't give you warning on this, but I'm hoping that you all will be interested and have some ideas. Steve.
Yeah, well, in the 3 years I was the chairman of the commission, I drafted several of them. There was a question last year about what the utility of the report was and what the audience was. If we look at our charter, our bylaws, it's a report to council. And it's been on and off since 2008, I believe. So I think we ought to have a discussion about where would the value be, because I know a couple of times it was submitted and it wasn't clear what value it was providing to anybody, or if anybody was really reading it. So I'll just throw that out there.
Thanks, Steve. Councilmember Ackman.
Thanks. I guess I'd be interested to see what that looked like in the past. I didn't know that was part of our charge, so thanks for raising it. One thing that the Transportation Commission does at the end of their year is create a report of all the work that they did and accomplished, which I think it was just really nice to take a step back and also be able to deliver something on the council that was kind of like very tangible things that were accomplished and completed. So I don't know if that was the model of the previous report, but maybe that would provide a useful focus.
Okay, thanks. Good comment. John Mursky.
I'll start with a question of Councilmember Ackman. Is that something that it just did on its own, or is it in the bylaws? And I'll follow that up with a question to everyone. Are any other boards or commissions required to do the same thing? The Energy Commission does not. We have done likewise in the past, but it's probably been 3 or 4 years ago that we issued, I think, 2 years in a row accomplishment reports. I don't know that they led to anything. I'm just wondering if anybody knows. Transportation Commission have it in its bylaws to issue such a report, or will it do it on its own? And whether other boards and commissions have a similar charge.
I'm looking at the bylaws right now. I'll answer when I find it. People should feel free to continue. I can, yeah.
Does any other commission have such a requirement? I'm thinking Parks, maybe.
Parks does not.
Okay. So, and I'll admit the information that I pulled out was not directly from the bylaws. It was from just the kind of like the lead into the description of the Environmental Commission itself. So it's worthwhile to actually go back to the source, which I can do. And we don't have to close on this today. I just really want to think, let us decide if it's a good thing for us. Councilmember Dish.
Well, I remember we worked on that the first year I was on this. I remember, Steve, we worked on it, and trying to actually do it as a state of the environment report seemed very overwhelming, but also duplicative of things that other departments do. So for example, the Water Quality Matters newsletter is the best source you could have on the state of that. And OSI just released its 3-year progress report on what it's been doing. We could certainly release a lack of progress report and actually a regression report on deer if we wanted to do that. And that would be something that that could be helpful in terms of, starting to raise consciousness around that responsibility. But it seems to me that we want to, that charge seems sort of maybe outdated. I don't know if the water quality newsletter existed then. OSI probably didn't exist when that injunction was written. And so I wouldn't want us to get involved in a really extensive, like inventory of everything that's going wrong and right in Ann Arbor. That would just feel like a big, a pretty big labor for us. I don't know how others feel.
Councilmember Ackman.
Yeah, so just to answer Commissioner Murphy's question, the bylaws of the Transportation Commission say that we will report annually to the City Council regarding the effectiveness of the city's transportation strategy process and make recommendations for any changes there too. So, perhaps it morphed, but what it really seems to be is an annual report of accomplishments.
Sean, looks like you've got a comment.
Yes, just chiming in. Just wanted to say I'm looking at the Environmental Commission bylaws. It does say by ordinance, the commission is charged with the following powers and duties. And there's a list of items, one of which is to publish and present an annual report on the city's state of the environment using whenever possible measurable performance indicators to monitor long-term trends. So it is in the bylaws. I will also say that these bylaws can be changed. There's a process to do so. So if we wanted to remove that, we certainly could. And I will look into the process if that is what the commission wants to do.
Thank you. I'll just say that this might be something that gets echoed right away. I just have the feeling that it would be worthwhile for us to identify issues that we as commissioners feel are of concern. And that may come out in our subsequent discussion when we focus on the work groups, particularly. I'd like to have us at least consider it. I'm also okay with changing bylaws. I don't want to make work by any measure, but I do like the idea of measuring. So John Mirsky.
I would just like to point out that if we had a public facing dashboard, as the resolution that we passed called for, then it would make such a report a lot easier to write, where we could then refer to specific metrics and call attention to gaps and make specific recommendations on policies. In the absence of that, it's more difficult to do.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. I'm going to just say that let's hold on this and think and have a decision at a future meeting. And maybe we'll have some other ideas as we proceed through this particular sort of planning meeting. That's what I'd like to do right now. Is everyone okay with that? Okay, thanks. Oh, I do want to say two things that I meant to kick off. I want to say, first off, thank you to Steve Brown for your leadership as chair. I appreciate all you provided, and I'm going to work my hardest to keep us going in the direction that you started us, or that I stepped into. And I'm going to try and keep our meetings efficient and directed toward the goals that we intend to accomplish together. I also want to acknowledge the loss to our commission and to the Planning Commission of Shannon Gibb-Randall, who has had to step down for family reasons. And I want to thank her very much for the work that she has done for the city and her model of approaching natural features and thinking through the big pictures of the city. So I'm really sorry we'll miss her. And I'm hoping that we hear soon from the Planning Commission as to who may step into her role for our commission. Steve, looks like you want to say something.
Yeah, I found the latest version of this document about our accomplishments for 2019.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Okay.
the thing is, it had been dormant for a long time before I became the chair, and I tried to revive it. And so we did the 2019, and then of course COVID intervened.
Right.
There were some other things going on as well, like the Gelman plume at the end of I think it was 2021. That you know, there was a lot of flurry of activity then that we didn't really have time to discuss it. So I'll just send it. I don't. There's no chat here, no chat function, so I don't know where I can send it.
I would suggest that you send it to Sean, and we'll ask Sean to send it to the whole group
will do
for
that.
review. Yeah.
Yes, I can
thank
do
you.
that.
That's great. And then we can look at it all over all of us, and ideally come to a conclusion as to how we would like to proceed. Okay. So I already talked about us not doing streaming. So what I thought we would do would be to spend 20 minutes or so on each of the work groups that are active right now, and maybe if need be, consider reconfiguring or adding or whatever. So with that in mind, I would appreciate a discussion starting with, in alphabetical order, natural features. And I'm really sorry that Chris Graham isn't here. My guess is that he's working hard. So if we could proceed with a discussion of natural features in general, I guess our perceptions of how we've been doing, issues that are of interest to us, and focus that could be addressed in the coming year. So Commissioner Curtis.
So Rita, do you want to just put natural features last to see if Chris Graham does call in?
Sure.
Would that be easiest? And I can.
Let's just try that. Okay, that's fine.
I'll
Okay.
I'll text him and ask him if he can join us.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, then I'm going to move us on to pollinators. And that means me as lead, but I will very much appreciate input from my fellow commissioners who joined on with pollinators, and Anya Dale, Bridget Gruber, and Council Member Ackman. We have, I think, successfully initiated the Pollinator Aware Yard Care program this year with Sean's help and that of the Office of Sustainability. And we've had people register to do this. We've responded to questions, we've delivered yard signs, and we have started some discussions of some ongoing ways of communicating with the community on support for pollinators, which includes landscaping with native plants and reducing mowed turf grass. That's one of our things. I guess I want to step back and see if any of my work group colleagues would like to comment on things that they have been involved with or would like to be involved with. And I did send out some notes that may or may not be helpful, but anyway. Anya, Bridget, Dharma.
That you unmuted yourself first.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi.
Well,
Okay.
I'm wondering the best way to do this. So we have a bit of a running list of things that we think are
Mhm.
priorities, but my feeling is we need to maybe prioritize and think about what we want to tackle and whether the rest of the commission agrees. And I also just want to throw out there that I've been wondering, there's a lot of overlap between this and just this general idea of protecting biodiversity. And do we want to, I've been wondering if we should shift this group to sort of a more biodiversity group instead of just pollinators, but I don't know the history of how this group started. So
Mhm.
I'll just throw that out there, something that I've been thinking about. And then Rita, I don't know if we want to share, if we can share screens and show our list, if that's a good way to do it, but I'll defer to you on this.
Sean, if you could give me share capabilities, I will do my best.
It looks like it's enabled already.
Is it? Thank you. Share screen. Thank you. Okay, now this tricky thing of, give me a minute. I hope you can't see my screen now because this is really awful. Boy. I am, wait.
I think I can share my screen. Would that be helpful?
Yes.
Hope
Thank you.
Anya's got it.
Yep. I'm gonna get out of here. I would like to get out of here, and now I don't know how.
I sort of hijacked it and
Yeah, that's okay. It's my problem
the
with my
screen.
screen here.
Can
Okay.
you go to?
Oh, there, I found it. I found stop share. Thank you. All right. Okay. Can everyone see and read that? Barely.
Sarita, this is the document that you shared, and we had sort of a running list. I just from
Right.
the email that just popped down to the bottom. I don't know what part you want to share right now with folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can someone go to 100% and increase this to say 150 or 200%? There we go. Great. Excellent.
Let's start at the top.
Okay.
Because I like the idea of our mission. I particularly like Bridget's idea of moving on to biodiversity, because that might actually might help us with our communication and linking together with other important things that the Environmental Commission may focus on, which would include management of deer, perhaps, and the balance between deer and vegetation. Okay, so here, what we had declared as our goals. And some of this was written at the point when we were NOMO-MAY focused. So it's before the pollinator and aware yard care program was initiated. So you'll see that NOMO-MAY reference. Okay. Great. And here's our end and kind of where we were. These are more current. And I'll say about the first one, excuse me, we've been offered by the Xerxes Society to reestablish our status as a bee city affiliated with the Xerxes Society that has a lot of great information on pollinators. And if I recall correctly, I think this was actually going to be a fee-free, at least for this particular year. and it sounded kind of good. And so we are considering that, making a recommendation with respect to that. And we'll be talking soon, I hope, with, excuse me, with Sean's help, to talk with staff who were engaged with Bee City in the past when the city was a participant, to see how easy or difficult it was. I will also mention that U of M and Washington Community College are both Bee campuses, which is kind of a nice affiliation.
So if we're looking for some conversation, I can say that I think the Bee City and Bee campus thing is a nice thing to be able to tout, right? I mean, it brings with it some data obligations or reporting obligations and a small annual fee, relatively small. So I don't think that that's nothing. I don't know if the data that is tracked for that is something that the city is already keeping track of, or if that would be a new endeavor. And if so, how much time would that take somebody, so I want to be mindful of that. But I definitely think with or without the certification, I think that network of bringing U of M and the city and Washington Community College, and just sort of having like a broader cooperation around both the educational aspects of the intent of Bee campus and Bee City, the communication and education component, but also I think that there's so much opportunity to look at the actual, it's an example of a natural feature that is, it does not matter at all one way or another whose property it's on, right? And so to me, it's something that this is definitely where we could get into, whether it's coordinated education events, which I know we've already started talking about for like a tour in the fall or something, but if it's actually looking at projects and pollinator corridors and where those go along, whether it's public property or in some cases private property, I think that there's a huge opportunity there. And I know I'm really personally interested in exploring the actual in the ground application of some of those things. Is maybe some projects that we can do as part of a collaboration. But a question I had on one of these bullets is, I'm talking about developing a policy that's in for large property owners who use native plantings. Do we even have a position to have a policy, or would it be more of like a program to educate and encourage and sort of bring them on as partners? I mean, we don't have a place for enforcement with that, really, do we?
Oh, no. There was never an intent to have enforcement, but we would like to have large landowners contribute to the availability of habitat. And the question has been, this has been an ongoing question that we've discussed since ever I've been on the commission, is like, how do we get, it's kind of a big bang for the buck. It's great, like really great that U of M is a Bee campus. So that is like a huge landowner. And so we would like to look at other groups and identify them. And so it's been an ongoing question, and there has never been a focused effort to do that beyond some minimal, I'll just speak for myself, minimal attempts to reach out to, say, a church or two that have some property surrounding them that may be interested. And so it's kind of that kind of thing. The goal is to kind of entice or whatever and expand the reach.
So for me, these sort of group into three things, which would be, the education and awareness components, any policy action that we would want to take, like the additional age or something like that, and then potential partnerships and on the ground projects. I sort of see those in those three categories. And and when they're chunked out like that, it doesn't feel too big to take on. Like, if you picked one sort of thing in each of those categories and had somebody commit to wanting to take the lead on that, to me it seems not too much to bite off, but I'm curious what other folks think.
Yeah.
I mean, just to pursue, I don't
Right.
say that we're going to be able to ban the sale of neonicotinoids, but
Yeah. It's a great goal.
Yeah.
John,
I like the pre-work that the working group has done. I think it's really good. It occurred to me before the meeting, I had two thoughts. One is I recognize awareness leads to becoming better informed, and that generally leads to taking action. And if the actions are well directed, that leads to positive outcomes. And thinking about myself, and I think this is probably true of all of us, we would like to be able to look back, whether it's related to pollinators and biodiversity or anything that we're doing in the commission, that we look back and think that we really focused on things that and spend our time on things that had the maximum input, the maximum impact, you know, the best return on our time invested, so to speak. And one of the things that I think we should think about as we talk through everything this evening is where do we have reasonable chances of taking those 4 steps: awareness, to becoming informed, to taking action, to the likelihood of achieving good positive outcomes. Where can we get all the way to step 4? Oh, not necessarily in this year, but at some point in time. And I think in some cases, we may have spent a lot of time doing a whole lot of things only to find out that there wasn't support or the political will, or there wasn't a consensus in the community of getting beyond awareness and being informed to really where we could take action that is really going to deliver positive outcomes. And I think what you have here in several cases are indications where you're taking actions and there is a reasonable likelihood of delivering a positive outcome. And I really think we should build on that, not only in the case of this group, but in case of all the groups.
those are great comments. Thanks. Anyone else? What are people's thoughts? I'm going to have to probably close pretty soon on pollinators, but what are people's thoughts about the addressing biodiversity, which would go beyond pollinators? Bridget?
I just wonder what the natural features group thinks and how that overlaps or doesn't. I like the idea. I struggled a little bit early on. I started this document last year, and you can see that everywhere I said we support pollinators, I've included the support local biodiversity, because we talk a lot about plants and try to inform and make people aware of the different native plants, but we couch it in the as supporting pollinators, but there are so many benefits associated with that we're all very aware of. And so if we could just expand on and maybe hit people with a benefit that they're more excited about, it might be a way to draw more people in and get them excited to take action. And anyway, so I'm excited about maybe this being a biodiversity group, but I'd also want to hear what the native features folks think about that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Brooks?
Yeah, I think from the natural feature side, biodiversity makes a lot of sense, and it's something we should be looking at quite a bit more. So combining it with, because there's a lot in pollinators that is natural features, and combining the two makes sense so we're not overlapping on some of the stuff we're doing. A lot of the trees are part of natural features also.
Mm-hmm. I'll just say I agree. Oh, Chris Graham, yay.
I'm sorry, I'm accustomed to having a date set in my office calendar, but they've all disappeared, and there wasn't one today for this meeting. I had to go back and search Sean's emails to find a link to get into the meeting. I wish we could get back to sending those links so that they're on my calendar ahead of time. I've felt for a while, and not very long, I, like the United Nations, was quite slow in recognizing how essential the protection and enhancement of biodiversity on the planet is part and participle of action about climate change. And I wrote an email last winter suggesting that we really needed to amend the A20 plan to fully include the protection of biodiversity in the city of Ann Arbor. And haven't gotten very far with that idea. But suffice it to say, it is a serious part of what we're losing as a result of changes in the climate worldwide and in our fair town. And we need to really think about how we relate to the environment from the standpoint of the scientific understanding of what biodiversity is in my backyard and your backyard, particularly on our protected natural areas, and how to make it work. I was thinking just this morning that 10 years ago, when I would listen to the birds singing in the spring, and I have some very nice, even native forest fragments not far down the street, the volume and to some degree the diversity of birds that I hear is less today. That's just plain flat out not good. And I appreciate there are other issues that are driving our planning commission and our planning director and our council members right now. But we should not forsake a critical, fundamental thing that we need to be doing now that we understand it. The United Nations was very late. A lot of their climate stuff was oriented toward energy. Last winter, they finally got on board and passed a very significant and very comprehensive set of suggestions about how to deal with biodiversity on the planet, including protecting 30% of the planet, ocean and land from changes by development. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Anya?
Thanks. I don't know how to raise my yellow hand when I'm green, apparently. I like the idea of broadening it out to be biodiversity. I think that pollinators is just like a good indicator and a good thing to get people sort of excited about and behind it. Like, like people use the monarch when we're really talking about all kind of pollinators, right? Like, and that's just an indicator of habitat health overall. So I like the idea of broadening out to biodiversity and to that end, and I'm not necessarily proposing, but I wonder how much overlap there is between then that effort and the natural features group. And if we all just should be one big happy group. And I don't know if it belongs in this conversation or when the natural features folks talk, but something that I'm interested in for U of M, I'm trying to get U of M to do this. And I hope that it will happen. I think there's a number of people who have a voice that is often listened to, who also like the idea and are behind this, to do a very comprehensive inventory of our ecosystem services, right? And biodiversity being one of those. Plant biodiversity, which to whatever degree we can get something on insects, I think would be good. But also other ecological functions, that make the land more resilient and stuff like that, stormwater and anything else, groundwater recharge, all of it, but having a very comprehensive inventory and then identifying the areas that are already really high priority to make sure that we're protecting because of that ecosystem service. And then other areas that have potential for it because of what's there, but maybe need more active involvement to try to like increase that. And whether that's because of like, you know, the soil functions there, or because of the biodiversity there, or where it is in relation to certain, you know, communities and populations, or filling in the gaps in the pollinator corridor. You know, I think all those things, to me, that's something that should not just be a U of M project, that it could be a very big task to take on as a community together. And I guess I want to make the pitch that maybe we consider it's a big project, but maybe that's something that both the pollinator or biodiversity working group and the natural features working group might consider teaming up to do.
Thank you. I like everything I'm hearing, and so I think that this is a really good conversation, and it might be time to segue into natural features. And we don't have to be confined by what the work groups have been, is what I think. And so we need to figure it out among ourselves, what are good ways to go, and what kinds of things will help us achieve what we need. But I do like the idea. Your thought on an inventory is a really good point to give us it's like, I'm always looking for a baseline, you know, it's like, where do we start? And the only way you know is by looking at what you have. So I'd love to do something like that and figure out how to do it. So that I don't know either. So we'll see what happens. So is everybody okay right now with shifting over focus and talking about the natural features side of our work group? I'm going to say yes. And I see John Mirsky has a hand up.
I have a layman's understanding of the separation of the two groups. It seems to me that natural features has focused on plants and physical natural features, and the pollinator group had focused on, let's say, animals and insects, things like that. And the two are so interdependent, it seems to me it makes sense to combine the two. I understand Chris's thought of combining it with A20, but taking the lead of the United Nations had a conference on biodiversity. It has separate conferences on climate and climate change. And it seems to me that separation still makes sense. We have two separate commissions in the city of Ann Arbor. Energy, I mean, the climate is largely driven by energy related issues, how energy is generated, how it's saved, the types of fossil fuels that are burned, the kinds of chemicals that are used, like refrigerants that have high global warming potentials. Those are separate kinds of issues, even though certainly the climate impacts biodiversity and everything else. So my layman's understanding would be it makes sense to keep the environmental commission issues separate from the energy commissions, but to combine the two working groups as has been discussed for the last several minutes. I don't know if that resonates with anybody else.
Sean.
Yeah, I'll just hop in really quick to say I definitely support combining the two working groups. I will, however, bring up that the working groups do have to be sub-quorum groups, which means that it would need to be, I believe, currently we have 13 commissioners, so currently it would need to be 6 people or less. When we're at our full size of 15 commissioners, it would need to be 7 people or less on that working group.
And can I ask a follow-up question on that? Does that mean that show up for those meetings anytime? Like if there are 7, but we coordinated that one person just was conveniently not there each time, would that be okay or no?
That is something I would have to check with our clerk's office and our legal department. I think technically, and again, this is not, I don't have the legal knowledge. I think technically that would satisfy the Open Meetings Act, but I would have to check with the folks.
Thanks for bringing that up, Sean. Yeah, we don't want to mess with the Open Meetings Act, but boy, the thought of combining these is so interesting and potentially rich with benefit. Okay. All right. If we talk about natural features now, would anyone like to kick it off? There was no expectation of a presentation, and actually what we got to see was really nice, but you know, it's not, doesn't have to have that intro. So Brooks.
So before I joined the commission, either earlier this year or late last year, there was when Steve was hosting a review of the 2023 project goals. So I can kind of go through those for natural features because I found that. One is just to summarizing, getting the natural features updates in the UDC. I know we've talked about that some before, but you know, I think that is still ongoing. And also Chris has some additional updates he wants to make to that. Getting the natural feature areas and the city map using ArcGIS, and that is still ongoing. It's not done yet. I think that's more now of a quarterly follow-up just with the IT people and say, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Just to make sure it's not dropped. Because I know sometimes things do get dropped. There is invasive species, prioritize, develop plans for management on public and private properties, including educational information on priority areas and alignment resources available to attain SMART goals. I'm not really sure what that is referring to. I don't know if anybody has information on that. And there was review the 2015 natural feature goals, which I have not done. Effective deer population management needs to be a priority. And then other things that have come up. We had a good meeting with NAP last month. I think we should just follow up on the open issues there to keep working on those. And then the 10,000 trees initiatives somewhere, somehow, I think we should probably be a little bit more involved with that. I did ask Sean what the percentages were. I think it was 81.7% were native trees, which is higher than I was expecting. So that's probably a good thing, and it's going to go up a little bit more than that. But you know, there were some questions back on to get some more detail, so we might want to follow up on that also. Chris, is there something you want to add? You've been doing this a lot more than I have.
Oh gosh, Brooks, you did a good job. I just am sorry that we are stymied about proceeding with amendments to the code to improve protection of natural features, that we are stymied about being involved in the development of natural features master plan, which we wrote 20 years ago. I'm just seriously afraid that the whole purpose of that is to reduce protections for natural features that are thought to be getting in the way of development, which they never have. And I don't think they will.
What's coming to my mind right now is just that echo of of the kind of an inventory or something to show the problem. So an example of that is really the slideshow that John Mirsky presented to us last meeting of the invasive species along the border to border trail. You know, it's kind of an example of what happens in our natural areas when invasive species take over. It's been on my mind quite a bit, the whole thing of that. I see it as like artificial dividing lines between our private property parcels and public property parcels. And the fact that they all really are one. And I think, Anya, you were kind of alluding to that kind of thing too. It's like, what is our way to kind of integrate all that and encourage the plants that are not harmful, for example, and the habitats that are needed to support the biodiversity that we need. How do we get there? Is that our job? feels like we have a potential to influence that. And I would like to do that if we can.
Well,
I'll
I
throw-
think Brooks has been on a very good track in trying to illuminate how the natural race program has operated over the last 20 some years. Their original work was to inventory those portions of our parks that had native forest fragments and wetlands and swamps and river border marshes and then to try to rank them in their relative value in biodiversity, and then to see what the basic problems were. And of course, number one of those problems was the presence of, by 1990, a very mature infestation of a few invasive shrubs. And those caused shade on the forest floor, particularly. And that caused a dramatic loss in the biodiversity of the forest floor. When Ann Arbor was first being settled in the early 1800s, pollen studies have shown that there were something like 300 species of plants in our forest floors. The Indians had for 8 or 9 or 10,000 years lived here and regularly burned the landscape, which kept even our native shrubs at a low level. It kept the spacing of trees quite wide apart, so there was lots of light on the forest floor. But of course, we had also a lot of rain, so we had the benefit of not only having prairie species in southern Michigan, but the ephemeral spring wildflowers that are famous in Michigan here as well as up north. And that created a great level of diversity. The Indians were doing this for the ability to defend their camps, one of which was in Ann Arbor, our original settlement area down on Allen's Creek, on the east bank of Allen's Creek. They were doing it to be able to keep deer away from their food. The deer were following them around. They were doing it not knowing, probably in a scientific way, but realizing that the diversity of species was much better when they employed fire. And the net result was the Indians stewarded our landscape for quite a few thousands of years to produce something that was extraordinary to behold. When I was a boy, these plants began to appear in the woods around my house. I can remember wondering what in the world they were and beginning to learn about them. By 1970, they were being spread quite widely in the city by robins and thrushes who were learning to stay the winter because there was food for them to eat. Hammer honeysuckle fruit and buckthorn fruit are kind of awful to eat, but in the winter it sustains these birds. But they are quite serious vectors for moving the plants across the city. By 1985, 1990, these plants were extraordinarily mature and really were completely shading out the forest floor, including in our best natural area portions of our city parks. And so NAP began. And the first job past their inventory was to go after the invasive species. Once they got them out, then the idea was to begin to restore fire management, which we could do in the parks, but the NAP program has been very skittish because they were seriously raked by people wondering what all this smoke is about. Why are you doing that? I've been raked, even when I've done prescribed fires on private property by the neighbors who come by and say, what in the world are you doing? Do you have permission to do that? Right in the middle of town. Yes, of course we did. But so now the third thing is to begin to do much better inventorying. And Brooks is right on the right track to begin to ask for going back and doing that and beginning to see really where we are on our biodiversity measuring sticks. How are we coming? And to contemplate what we do about the impacts of climate change. And we, unlike some of the much more important state natural areas, have the ability to begin to bring some southern species in here and help transport them north. Things are changing so fast that Mother Nature is not able to keep up by moving species. Plus, there's a lot of development in the way these days. So there's an opportunity, if we're talking about protecting the city of Ann Arbor's biodiversity now, to really enable the NAP program to lead the way in mitigating some of the damages that are occurring by helping Mother Nature do better. 4 steps, 4 big steps, all of them have been traumatic for the Natural Areas Program folks. I'm, again, very appreciative of Brooks, who's been a serious participant as steward in Natural Areas Program, for getting involved in this and bringing this idea to our attention. Thank you, Brooks.
Brooks.
Yeah, one thing with NAP, I mean, they're restricted by millage to only work in public parks. So,
Yep.
You know, I think we all know we need to do private lands also. So that needs to somehow go beyond NAP. You know, we can't just ask NAP to do it because they're not allowed to do that.
Right.
So I'm going to ask council members Dish and Ackman if you have ideas in terms of policies that we can perhaps start formulating or work with you on that would support the kinds of concerns that we have about biodiversity and working with private areas in conjunction with improvements on public space. And if it's something you need to think about, then we let it be that. Councilmember Dish.
Well, I think, as always, what we would need to do is work with the relevant staff, because I'm sure that they've thought about a lot of things. And so, you know, maybe Sean has some thoughts about where OSI could fit in, or maybe we should be, well, not parks, but you know, anything we want to do on private property can really only be advisory and educational. Because it's just, legally, we don't really have the ability to control what people do on the land that they own. So I think this is where we get back to the working through the pollinator group in the way that you all have been working to raise awareness and give people support for how to convert stuff. But, you know, I think this would be a good discussion to have to see, you know, where what you're talking about overlaps with initiatives that staff feel that they can take on. I don't know, Councilmember Ackman, did you have any other thoughts?
Not at the moment, though I'm happy to think more on that, but I think what you're saying resonates.
So I have one potential suggestion I'd love to get feedback on, and that is I'm stuck on plants. So what about something like, so it's heavy-handed, but what about a thing where in some communities, they've actually paid people to remove things. For example, mowed grass in arid areas of the country, where so they install xeriscape native plantings and definitely less irrigation, as an example, or removal of, I believe I found it, and I told somebody, maybe in Traverse City area or someplace else, where they gave people a payment to remove Japanese barberry. And I know in other states, they pay people to take down their, what's that horrible pear tree? Bradford pears that are seriously invasive. So I'm just wondering, just whether that might be a potential kind of thing that we could go on. And I know it's heavy-handed, and I know there's a budget, but it's one way to go. Commissioner Calvert.
Yeah, just a thought on that. I think what drives that in the arid areas is the shortage of water and the price of water, right? So we have to find the right lever to make things like that work, rather than it simply being kind of, punitive or preferable or whatever it is, but we're trying to find the right lever for it. And I don't know what those are, but I think, that's always a good strategy, but have to find the right way.
Councilmember Ackman.
Yeah, I also think some of the stuff that you referenced, like in Nevada, I believe that is state law. And I think that's again where we have limits on what we can do as a city. It would have to be accomplished in the state. And as I think it was Brooks that said, it's the drought, water supply that's really driving that. Yeah, so just wanted to point that out.
Okay. Commissioner Graham.
Well, there's more that we could do. First of all, we can regulate better and more accurately and more carefully. For example, there is utterly no regulation right now on the loss of trees on single family, 2-family, and I guess 4-family properties. I'm not suggesting we make me or anybody else come downtown and get a permit to cut a tree. I'm suggesting we continue to regulate in the way we have been with natural features, and that is to exact a cost. That cost is, first of all, to know what you're doing. In case of developments, that means presenting the city planners with 3 plans that show that you have designed your property to minimize the impact on natural features and show that you've really thought through how you're doing it and why you're doing what you're doing. And secondly, to genuinely protect with fencing and so on the natural features you've decided to keep. In the case of single family properties, there's no such requirement at all. You come down and get a building permit. Nobody cares about the trees on the property. And I'm sorry, my profession and the tree guys and the excavators that dig buildings don't care about the trees. And a whole lot of property owners who say, I'd like to keep that tree and that tree and that tree while I tear down this house and build a little bigger one. Find out 4 years later that the people who worked on that property to do that killed them by doing all sorts of stuff on top of the roots of those plants that were unprotected. We can do a better job regulating. We can do a better job with having a program, not one that goes to work on people's property, but one that goes out and says, hi folks, here's what you have in your neighborhood. These are your natural features. These are your native forest fragments. These are the places in your neighborhood that have the potential to produce more biodiversity if you care for them in a way intended to do that and teach them how. That's why NAP is important. They taught a whole lot of people in the city about invasive species by the work they were doing and the publications they were making and the people they were talking to and all the people, thousands of people that work for them. When I started in business in 1980, my clients didn't know about invasive species. I have yet to meet one in the last quite a few years that don't know about it and aren't happy to have that work done for them. I've learned not to take them down without knowing what I'm going to put in their place, because those plants tend to be good screens. We can have a part of the 820 plan that looks at biodiversity and asserts that that's an important function of our city. We can have a deer management program. There is nothing except mature invasive shrubs that is more damaging to our biodiversity than having too many deer in our city. Flat out fact. Thank you.
Councilmember Ackman.
I had a question just based on a couple of things that have been raised here, but is there a map of native forest fragments in the city? Is that maintained someplace now? I would just love to know.
We worked with a University of Michigan SEAS program in 2021 to develop a way of remotely sensing our forests and its species across the city. The net result of that is, I think I can say yes, it's in the hands of our IT department, the results of that work. It probably needs another chunk of work, but I would be able to show you where the native forest fragments are from that work. I'd like to show you a lot more than the information they've assembled for us gives us. But for the first time, it will be shortly, I trust, on our GIS system at the city.
Commissioner Omerski.
I'd like to go back to your statement a few minutes ago and ask our council member liaisons to be frank with us and tell us, are the kinds of changes to protections that Christopher has mentioned, grading, enhanced protections for trees, is that within the realm of possibility? Is something like a deer cull within the realm of possibility? Is there anything that might increase resources for native species eradication or removals, at least on city lands? Is that within the realm of possibility? And if those kinds of things aren't, then what is? And then my sense is we should focus on those. I'll just speak for myself. I work with Chris and a couple of other people on these proposed changes for the UDC for 4 years, and they just seem stuck in the mud. And I don't want to work on something else that's just going to be stuck in the mud.
Councilmember Dish.
So I'm getting a little lost as to the specific ideas that are being asked for. It feels like we're kind of moving all over the place, but I was taking notes when Chris was talking, and the point that you ended on with the work, the mapping of landmark trees that the SEAS group did in 2021. I think it would be a shame not to capitalize on that work. And personally, I've been working a lot with John, and I have both been working a lot with the circular economy. And one phase of that work that is my dream and hope, but it's not right now a plan or a strategy because we're not there yet, is to do some neighborhood organizing, to really do some house parties and get people thinking about conservation, repair, regeneration. What you're talking about is within the realm of that. And it would be very powerful to have a tool like a map that enables people to know what the resources, the natural features of value are in their neighborhoods. I think that is that is one thing that you can organize around. Here, we're going to show you what you've got and what you could take care of. So I can see that as a really promising idea. And it sounds like you are following up a little bit, or Brooks, you're following up a little bit with what the status of that work is. I'm happy to take guidance, or perhaps Sean, it would be appropriate for Sean to inquire as to if they're, what's the status of capitalizing on that work. I think, so you're kind of, it sounds like you're asking for sort of an extension into an extension beyond the work that the city can do on public lands. And I think that that's an interesting way to go about it. And it's always nice to have something to offer. And so information is one of those things that you can offer in a grassroots campaign. The deer management, I have had several conversations with Chris Dick, and I would really like to get his agreement to meet with, little groups of council members who are open to hearing more about the benefits of deer management. And I learned yesterday that Livonia, I believe their citizens voted for a deer call. So there might be a shift happening around this. I know that there has been a shift on the East Coast where cities are more willing to do it. Not just because there are car crashes and windshield shattering, but because people are realizing that it's an ecological thing and it's a stewardship thing. So I think we've talked about this before. I think staff's perception is that the residents are pretty much in one of two camps and they don't move. And so what is needed is a willingness on council to stand up to the tremendous pressure we would get from the Humane Society and allocate the money and figure out a way to make the cull you talked about the hostility that NAP gets, or the precarity of the burning. I mean, it's true, but the burnings are pretty institutionalized. We get them, they do them, they're pretty normalized. If the cull could be like that, so that it's not this giant thing the way we had it, but if you're doing it as a maintenance thing, it's less expensive and it's also more regularized. So Chris and I have talked several times about how we could work around educating council members carefully, gently educating. I don't want to sound like a Stalinist, even though some people might think I am one, but I continue to talk to him about doing that. And I'm trying to gauge the level of interest, like how many votes could I get and how many votes can I not get? Because staff's made it really, really clear that they don't want me to do what I did 2 years ago, which was propose to bring back the studies. And there was a really hot battle on council and the Humane Society got into it. And it just, that politicizes everything and staff gets really concerned because it's a painful program for them to do. They're not happy to have sharpshooters shooting at mammals in our city. So we need to not have it be, if we're going to move forward, it can't be a big battle on council. We have to have enough support. So I am happy to continue my tiny progress on that.
Great. I just want to point out, I think I would like us to talk about the other existing work groups, but let's close out with these two hands up. Chris Graham first.
Thank you, Lisa. I just want to remind you that we had a big public hearing. We filled up the auditorium at Slauson School 6 or 7 years ago. We went through a serious and long process of educating the council members then, and they found their way through this awful flack-filled process to make a good decision back then. Reinventing the wheel now is a bit frustrating. The other suggestion I'd like to make is that this matter not at all be in the discretionary budget that's voted on by the council. This needs to be something staff is asked to do. Find a place in the budget, maybe the parks budget, where this, I think, maybe on the order of $150,000 a year forever is tucked, and it comes to council as part of the overall budget, and you don't vote on it except for the overall budget. You may take some flack, but placing it in that kind of track gets you out of harm's way and you out of most of the flack way. I don't see another way short of reinventing the wheel about educating every council that we get to have it in a discretionary budget and get anywhere about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Councilmember Ackman.
Following on that, similarly, I'm kind of wondering why this can't be a NAP program. I mean, if it's about, it can't be. Okay, Lisa already knows why it can't be. So I just thought since it's kind of preserving, you know, plant life and new tree growth, I thought maybe it would fit within that. And I guess just before I turn it back to Councilmember Dish, the thing that I worry about is there's such a huge opposition and almost, I mean, it doesn't seem like there's that many people that feel passionately for excluding this group, of course. I think my impression is it ranges from like, I don't really care one way or the other to like vociferously, rabidly against. So that, you know, just concerns me.
Okay, I hear you. Okay, really quick, please, Chris.
There were surveys done while we were doing it before. The great majority of people in Ann Arbor that responded favorably to the deer call. There were some that didn't respond or said, they don't bother me, so I'm not worried about it. There was a distinct minority, very vocal and very awful. And, you know, governed by a national organization that came after you guys, your predecessors. Just because they're awful and nasty doesn't mean they're a majority. Secondly, I don't think NAP is the place to put it unless you're able to increase their budget. And I think there are other reasons to increase their budget. I think you have a Parks millage coming up for renewal in 2024. I think the majority of people in the city of Ann Arbor have been willing to support the parks maintenance and NAP program budget now for 25 years. Wouldn't surprise me if a modest increase for this and maybe some other things that NAP might want to do, not to speak of what parks might want to do, and you probably know more about that than any of us, but I'd sure be willing to go work for a little bigger millage next year. But taking it out of the current NAP budget is probably not going to make them happy.
Okay. I did see your hand up, Councilmember Dish. If you want to add to anything, that'd be great.
I just want to move us along. Councilmember Ackman and I can talk more later. I just don't think that NAP is the same thing. I think, yeah, the rationale is really good, but I don't think that they would, I don't think they'd want to be associated with it, honestly. And it's a volunteer organization, so you would cut, I mean, that could be very tricky. So, I mean, I will definitely, yeah. But I think that, so I'm hearing everything, and Councilmember Ackman and I will try to figure out, you know, what it would take to get the money and how we can rally some support. In order to restart it, council has to vote. So there's no sort of discretionary, non-discretionary budget. It has to have council support. So.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So it is now 8:23. We have discussions of solid waste and water quality. So let's go to solid waste. And
Sure.
Love to
I'll
hear.
get that started.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so I think the first thing we'd like a name change to the Circular Economy Working Group. I think that better reflects the activities we've been focused on for the past couple of years and some of the ideas we'd like to bring forward tonight.
Okay.
So what I have is some ideas that were put together in conversations that Councilmember Dish and I had with Sarah Mason and Jenny Petoskey from the city, kind of about what the work that we've been doing for the past couple of years and where that's at, where that can move forward, along with some new ideas. So let me share my screen here. So there's kind of three areas we wanted to kind of bring to this group. One is, I know we've talked a lot around construction and demolition, and my sense is there's kind of, it's perhaps a good time to revisit that and kind of move that forward. Sarah Mason was particularly interested if, you know, any of us working in this circular economy group could look at market capacity, you know, where can the stuff go, what is, can be taken. You know, there's different ways to go about it. And there's actually been an Eastern Michigan University fellow working with the city who will be wrapping up their work next month, I believe, that can kind of pass off some work that that person has been doing about policy research. And Jenny Petoskey has found that Portland, Oregon has got some really good information and policies around this to help kind of move that forward. So that's kind of one area around construction and demolition. The next one is to kind of help with kind of where we're at with the circular economy strategy. So, we've been talking about maps this evening. You've saw the maps that we've done. That's been really helpful to help people understand where the circular economy is at and, what's involved with it. We're currently kind of in the middle, moving towards the end of some work with a consultant around community engagement and kind of pretty thoughtful and intentional approach to reaching folks who've not been included previously. So out of that, the next stage is a listening tour to get kind of more input about what folks are thinking and what they respond to around the circular economy, what support they're looking for, and also some town halls around that. So there's kind of a need to kind of support that work in partnership with the city. And then the third area is more solid waste specific, but it's trying to get at this issue of metrics that are more than just diversion, how to better capture, measure, think about what it is that we're doing, what is it that our efforts around solid waste management are really providing to the community, to residents, to the planet. And so there's, I think, pretty significant interest from the city, particularly Sarah Mason, to kind of dig into this and have that inform some type of, repeatable, reliable, doable or sustainable approach to those metrics, and have that contribute to, another topic we talk frequently about with this group, and I know in the city, into some type of dashboard. So those are the kind of three areas that kind of bubbled up in some of the conversations that a couple of us have been having. Lisa, anything you'd like to add to that? Maybe not. Did we lose Lisa? Looks like we may have lost Lisa.
We may have lost her. Oh, shoot.
Yep. So why don't I just pause and see if folks have any comments or questions about these items. Steve.
Yeah, John, for a couple of years there, I think it was like 2019, 2020, I spent hundreds of hours working on construction and demolition, and I've summarized some information that we garnered, and I attended a national meeting online about this specifically, and I talked to people in San Diego and other places. So I'm eager to share that with you if you have a group that's working on that now. I mean, all I've done so far is I asked Sarah Mason I forwarded my Google document that summarized everything to Sarah Mason, but I never heard back from her about that.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
I'd be happy to get that. I mean, it's an idea. We'll have
Yeah.
to see what we can handle, but this was one that actually came from, the city. So I think
Yeah.
it's maybe they're in a space where we can kind of collaborate on this.
Yeah, it kind of like language just because, first of all, the MRF hadn't restarted and all the contracts had to be negotiated. So I just suspended that for a while, but I'm eager to continue helping with that. So if you just invite me to the circular economy working group meetings, specifically where you discuss the construction and demolition, and I'll forward whatever documents I have, and maybe we could have a discussion sometime about what I did and what I discovered and all that. With
Great.
Jen and you all.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yep.
I see Commissioner Mirsky's hand.
I think these three topics are great. I'll speak briefly to at least really just to one. I think they're all great, but just to add on to what Steve said, construction and demolition was discussed in the meeting on Tuesday of the Washtenaw Zero Waste Coalition, basically just a citizens group. I think all know about it, or many of you do. Everybody that was present thought that this was something that should be a priority. And I'm sure you will get support from groups like that and people that are represented in that group. And I would just like to mention, it was brought to our attention that there was a group through the Graham Institute that worked on a study of C&D for Ferndale. And I just pulled it up, and it says that, let's see, where is it? That Catalyst Leader Circle Fellow Michelle Marin, who is one of the members, drafted an ordinance and corresponding deliverables aimed to increase the diversion of currently landfilled waste through recycling and reuse mechanisms. So that might be a great resource for this group going forward, and the people on that team might have an interest in doing it. And then the last thing is that I'd like to remind everybody that C&D was in the SHRIMP, the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan, not to implement it, but at least to gather information and statistics, which ties then to the point at the bottom, that would then inform a potential ordinance. So I think these are great. Well done.
And did I get the city right? Is it Ferndale?
It is Ferndale.
Okay, thanks.
And I'll send you, John, afterwards, I'll send you a link to the webpage that has a link to the report.
Thanks.
Councilmember Dish.
Yeah, sorry, my internet just keeps kicking me out of the meeting. So yeah, great. I'm really happy to hear about these existing resources. I just want to caution that we're definitely not at the point of writing anything like an ordinance behind this this point or work, item of work is to see what resources exist in this area to manage construction and demolition waste and to, other than landfilling it. And so it's really, we are at, or the way Sarah Mason sees it is that we're really at a pretty preliminary level, that before we could even frame anything like a policy or an ordinance or an incentive, we'd need to know what sort of services we have within reach. And so that's what we're trying to do here. And the stuff on Portland, which I had looked up and put links in, but then SharePoint ate my document. So it's really frustrating. So it's the ordinance for Portland. And then they have a website listing all the places you can take stuff. And so they're sort of a model for, yes, thank you, John, perfect, yes. So tools for hauling and facility officers, it's great what they've done there.
I have a question. And this is based on a webinar that I just attended that has to do with, it's a different topic from what's on the screen, but this has to do with plastics and microplastics. And where can the city go? So it is a form of micro solid waste. And where can we take that issue in our city? In this light, my understanding is that a goal is to reduce use of plastics. And if there's a way that we can support that, I think that would be something useful to us. Thanks. Commissioner Gruber.
Thanks. Something that I think about a lot as a parent at AAPS is all of the waste that I see. And I'm not suggesting that you solve that problem, but I wonder if, as part of your community engagement efforts, you could include AAPS in some of that engagement. They have a director of sustainability who is currently leaving. And so there is this gap and they need a lot of help. And so if there are ways to engage them and educate them about what the city's doing and some of the positive outcomes that we might be seeing, it could be a nice way to bring them in.
Do you mean Emil Lozana is leaving?
Yeah.
Work with AAPS has come up often, and I think it's just nobody's found the right way to connect with them just yet. So it's something I was doing on other projects over 15 years ago and just found it very difficult to connect with them. So, but certainly one not to give up on.
Councilmember Dish.
Yeah, well, I'm really frustrated to hear that because I have been working with Brian Ukena and first Molly Maciejewski and now Sarah Mason to set up a meeting with AAPS. And now I know why it's not getting set up. So no, I have actually been working on that since the spring and I am beyond irritated right now, but that's okay. We'll start over.
All right, I'm looking at the clock. Are there any other issues that we would like to address with respect to solid waste right now? Okay, so well, Commissioner or Councilmember Dish, is your hand up to respond to that? Or okay, thanks. Let's move on to water quality as a work group. Yeah, Steve, you've been the lead on that. Would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I'll get going. Can I share my screen, Sean? And the person, the people who've been most active in this so far this year is Sarah Nedrich, who is here, and Shannon Gibb Randall, who is not. So let's see here. So I'm going to start off with, I keep a set of Google Docs, just to keep organized. So for example, this is one, it's a master document. So, I list this was all discussed in the water quality working groups over the last couple of years. Progress on this working group was kind of lay dormant after Susan Hutton left the commission and and Bob Needham got involved in family matters and didn't have time to participate. So this is one working group that I wanted to revive, after that hiatus. And so I'm pleased to say that we've had some meetings. I've learned a lot of things. First of all, that the city hasn't many of these water quality issues as regards the Huron River are really managed through the Huron River Watershed Council has a meeting that they have quarterly, which involves also Jen Lawson as a staff person from the city that's representing the city's interests in this collaboration. For those of you who may not know, Huron River Watershed Council is it's a chartered organization that includes a lot of the local governments that border the Huron River. So the Middle Huron is basically Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, as far as I can tell, and so a lot of these issues are discussed in that forum. And I've gotten myself and Shannon and Sarah are invited to attend the quarterly meeting that the Middle Huron Partners, sponsored by the Huron River Watershed Council, and Rita as well. So, and Rita's been participating in this working group as well. But I just have this team document. This is something I try to do with all the efforts I work in. Is we'll just have a document and declare who's responsible for maintaining it, and the mission is to research issues pertinent to our bylaws, to advise city council and assist city staff, hold public meetings and hearings to assist communication between council staff and city residents on all activities impacting surface and groundwaters of Ann Arbor. So then I've started drafting some key facts and figures just for everybody to keep in mind. And then the working group goals here are basically the long-term goals are, of course, safeguarding the purity of surface and groundwaters. And the second is to improve the health of the Huron River to enable swimming, fishing, and other recreational pursuits. So some of the short-term, issues here, of course, the 1,4-dioxane Gelman groundwater plume. And that is, is a major activity of a local organization called CARD, Citizens Active for the Active Remediation of Dioxane. And so they principally Roger Rail and Dan Bicknell are probably the leading citizens here in town, which are coordinating efforts to get this groundwater plume cleared up. And so, as you know, one of the actions here that the commission was out of the picture because there was a consent judgment in force, and all the material facts and everything were really were closed to the public. Because the Environmental Commission was not an active participant in the original lawsuit. We were not really involved at all until they were revealed in 2021. I think it was in September of 2021, and we issued several. We had several meetings that were devoted just to this topic, to the groundwater plume. And we drafted and voted on a few resolutions that we passed to City Council. The principal ask was that we get the EPA involved, because this groundwater plume was first discovered in 1984 by Dan Bicknell when he was a student at the University of Michigan. So clearly, this groundwater plume has been spreading since then, and it will approach the Huron River at some point and become a contaminant to 85% of our drinking water sources, a source of our drinking water. So it's a textbook case about how weak environmental laws and enforcements really are. And so we're all looking forward to some meaningful cleanup of this groundwater plume. What we can do from now on is just monitor what's going on, and that's a lot of that comes through these CARD meetings, which are well organized and have participation by city staff as well as Eagle staff. So control, and then the second short-term goal is see what we can do about control of PFAS discharges from the wastewater treatment plant to wastewaters and biosolids. Of course, PFAS, we don't originate that pollution. It comes from chemical companies that manufacture it and put it into consumer products, as well as the Tri-Bar plant, up there in Wixom, which had been polluting our drinking water for decades. It's not clear how long they've been using PFAS, but I myself had tested my own blood. There are, there are commercial tests available now for $400 that are finger prick tests that you can have your own blood tested for PFAS. And so I did that myself, and I brought it to my physician, and she had no idea what I was talking about. So I think it's not as serious as some of the contaminations like that were experienced in the west of the state, but it's still, this amount of exposure has measurable health effects, principally in developing children, and it hinders the proper development of their immune systems, and it also interferes with cholesterol metabolism at an early age. And these effects can last for a lifetime. You've heard me talk about it before, but I think the city's done a very admirable job once the PFAS contamination of our intake water, drinking water, was discovered in 2014. 2015 as a result of the EPA's UCMR3 program, which first tested for PFOA and PFOS. The only PFAS chemicals that were tested for, but PFOS was the major contaminant arising from that TRIBAR plant. And so they've done a very admirable job at cleaning up the PFAS in our drinking water over the last few years. But it did involve an investment of some $1.5 million of the taxpayers' money, which at this point it cannot be recovered from the polluter. So we'll see what happens, because there's legislation both at federal and state level on trying to get polluters to pay for their contamination of other people's property. So the third item for short term is nutrient pollution, which is principally phosphorus. P is the atomic, is the elemental signature label for phosphorus. And the EGLA consent judgment to control HAPs, because as you know, it was news even to me a couple of years ago that EGLA had sued, at that time DEQ had sued the city for discharging nutrient phosphorus into the Huron River, which contributes to harmful algal blooms. HABs stand for harmful algal blooms. And these occur mostly in the lakes downstream of us, Ford Lake and Belleville Lake. And so we're currently under consent judgment that has a very, very long horizon. And so we can help monitor that, about what mitigation and remediation steps are being considered by city staff and by the Huron River Watershed Council. So this is one of the topics where we're basically working with, I hope we can work with the Middle Huron Partners Group and try to see what the options are and what the relative cost benefits are of remediation of this nutrient pollution, because it comes from both stormwater and the wastewater treatment plant. So roughly here in the Great Lakes, these nutrient pollutions come roughly half and half from stormwater discharges and wastewater treatment plant discharges. So number 4 here is just trying to research other pollutions to surface and groundwaters. One which Sarah Nedrich is particularly interested in is chloride. Road salt, it accumulates in the soils, in the groundwaters, and it causes measurable harm to vulnerable species in the river. The second thing is trichloroethylene, which is still a popular dry cleaning solvent. We have a few of those plumes under the city, and so and we'll see what we can do about trying to figure out how to get those cleaned up. And then, of course, there's PFAS and other POPs. POPs stand for persistent organic pollutants, and among those are mostly halogenated compounds, like those used for flame retardants that are added to sleepwear, and they're still allowed to use them. They're polybrominated chemicals that are added to fabrics, especially for children's wear. And they are persistent organic pollutants that also have health risks and ecological risks. And then the last one here, Rita already mentioned this, microplastics. And again, that's an issue that's probably best addressed in collaboration with the Huron River Watershed Council, but I've done quite a bit of research on this. We know the Huron River is extensively contaminated with microplastics. I can go on and on about this, but this isn't the forum for that. So the second, so here I also keep a document that that maintains minutes. So for the working group, so we've only had 2 meetings so far this year. One was in February 3rd, and one was in on May 4th. And so so we points of the discussion we had are there was a consensus that we should probably collaborate with Huron River Watershed Council on PFAS and microplastics. I mean, these are pollutants that are coming into our environment. We don't generate them so much as we just pass them through. Then there's HABs. So again, I mentioned that the city's under a consent judgment. So we'd like to have some public discussion about the nutrient pollution planning, about how the planning is going sometime in 2023. So that would mean inviting staff to talk about where they are in this process and what they think can be done about it and at what costs. And then Sarah Nedrich is leading on the chloride pollution. The first thing is to identify private sources, principally large landowners, like the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor Public Schools, et cetera. And some of the larger commercial operations like the Briarwood Mall. And just to try to collate, and also to collate information about brine applications on dirt roads. Brine is oftentimes spread on dirt roads to suppress dust. So that's more of a rural concern, but we do have dirt roads here in Ann Arbor. And so Sarah's looking into that as well. I've reached out to a former director of the RRD division at DEQ and now EGLA. His name is Mitch Edelman, and I'd like to invite him to discuss trichloroethylene groundwater plumes to the full commission at some point in 2023 and initiate more of a public discussion about this and what can be done to spur some remediation of these plumes that are existing underneath the city. And then Shannon Gibb Randall was a passionate champion about reviewing stormwater choke points in the Green Streets program and what progress is going on there. What I've discovered is that actually the County Drain Commissioner has a very large role to play here. So I'd like the full commission to initiate a review of the Green Streets program and stormwater management and how things are going and what the public should know and what maybe can be done about to help city council and staff deal with stormwater, since it's an increasing problem because of climate change here in the Great Lakes region. And then I'm also initiating an informal investigation into a volatile organic compound contamination of the Allen Creek drain. Residents have observed in West Park, oftentimes there's a petroleum or a gasoline-like smell coming out of the ground there. So I'm going to initiate some contact with the County Drain Commissioner and see if we can identify a point source for this pollution and see what can be done about cleaning that up. And so those are the overall goals, but potential projects we discussed at this meeting in May 4th is to increase the number of adopted drain volunteers in the city and to try to mobilize U of M students to attend to the UM drains and high student density neighborhoods. So the summer, there was a hiatus over the summer about this, but we've reached out to several student groups to see if we can get volunteers in the student body to help monitor discharges into the drains, into the street drains. And then what we can do to try to promote reporting of muddy water draining into storm sewers via the A2 Fix-It mobile app. This was another great idea that came up. Another point is try to locate source of these VOC gasoline odors in West Park within the Allen Creek drainage. And then continue to monitor the Gelman groundwater plume status and intervene when productive. And then one important thing that came up that I brought up that Sean, I sent an email to Milton Tahoney about this, but I never heard anything back about it. Is because many of us are not aware that the city of Ann Arbor had a staff position. It was a full-time staff position. The title was environmental coordinator, and it was last held by Matt Nod before he left the city. And the city has not replaced Matt. It has not filled this position since then. And we feel that a lot of what goes on in the city, especially now that there's more development going on, could benefit with an environmental coordinator involvement of an environmental coordinator. And so, for example, the DT waterfront development is starting. We know that that ground is contaminated by the coal gas plant that was there back in the, I don't know when it was closed, but it was back there in the 20s and 30s. And so I'm sure there's quite a few issues, but it's not clear, how well managed information happens for developments with regard to their, not just their environmental impact of the development, but the risks in doing the development itself. So it's not clear.
Excuse me, Steve, I'm sorry, but we're getting
Yeah,
close
we're
to
running
our
out of
9
time.
o'clock hour. So if there's a way for you to wrap up, and
Yeah.
I would love to
No.
have a tiny bit of discussion.
Yep,
If we have
I'm
the
done.
group's indulgence.
Yep, I'm done. Yeah, I just want to say that I try to keep action points for most meetings, and I'm done with that. Sorry.
That's okay. All right, so here we are at 8:55. Are there comments and concerns that the group has regarding the water quality work group? Suggestions? Seeing no hands. Oops. Mr. Mirsky.
Just one observation, thinking back on the whole evening. We have lots and lots and lots of activities. I think almost every group does. And I think maybe one of the things that we probably need to do is rethink everything again and pare down the number of activities so that because we have limited resources, including city staff has limited resources. And it just seems like we're awfully optimistic, put it that way, on what we think we might be able to do this year. If you just put everything all together, I think it's just going through this one commission. Wow, that's a lot. Two other things quickly. This is maybe directed at Anya. In terms of getting students involved, some of the things that Steve's talking about, could the Office of Campus Sustainability help, or student life potentially, in terms of connecting with students to do, like Craig mentioned drain monitoring. And then one last thing, I don't want to speak out of line, so I'll just anonymize it, but I spoke to a city department head and was told that Matt Nod's position will be filled. Plans are to fill that position. That's all.
Great. Sean, you have something?
Yeah, I have a few housekeeping items.
My internet got very bad for the last 2 minutes.
All right.
Okay.
Looks like Anya's maybe frozen.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I have a couple of housekeeping items kind of in relation to Commissioner Mirsky's first point. But if Councilmember Ackman, if yours is related to the water quality, please go ahead. Okay.
Go ahead, it's not. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So my first, Commissioner Calvert, was yours related to the water quality?
Just to Commissioner Mirsky's point about connecting with students, one suggestion for that is the Student Sustainability Coalition. which is coordinated by the Graham Institute. It's the interface for the dozens of different groups across campus that may be the best way to kind of connect, but maybe Anya has different opinions or different ideas.
Commissioner, Councilmember Ackman.
I just wanted to chime in to follow on what Commissioner Mirsky said, which is narrowing our scope, and then also to harken back to, a pain point that I know has come up several times. We don't want anyone spending a bunch of time working on something that's not going to go anywhere. So I think focusing our efforts in areas where, staff is already kind of planning to spend their time and could use our extra help to shape, or things. I know that there's a practice in this committee of us doing a lot of the work ourselves, like creating the communication for the pollinator support and then using staff to distribute. Anyway, I don't want people to go through that again. So whatever we can do up front to avoid that, I am in support of.
Yeah, to build on that point, I don't want anyone to go through that either. So one of the things I wanted to discuss was staff liaisons to each of these working groups. But I think before we get to that, because it will determine what we decide around that, I did want to raise the point of potentially combining the pollinators and natural features working groups into a biodiversity, say, working group. I wanted to see if that was something that the commission was interested in doing, so that when we move into the housekeeping discussions, we'll know that.
Is that something that requires a vote, or it seems to me it would be worthwhile to have at least a tiny bit of discussion, although I feel like it had support. Do we need a vote? You can answer that question.
I looking through the bylaws, I don't believe that there need to be official votes during an official meeting to set up committees and working groups. So I believe we can just do that if you want to have a vote to make sure that everyone is on board.
Let me see if I can phrase something. Is there support for combining the pollinator work group and the natural features work group? All in favor, raise your hand. Looks pretty positive. Okay, let's plan on that. We will have to determine how to address membership to avoid quorum violation. So that's something to be done. Can we table that for this evening's meeting? I propose that we do. And okay, thanks. What else, Sean? Did you have another element?
Yes, in regards to staff liaisons, it's my goal to make sure that there is a staff liaison for each of these working groups, so that we can help you to prioritize the work that you're doing in terms of what staff capacity is and what staff are already working on, to help hopefully avoid future situations of work that is done and then is not able to be implemented in the way that it was seen or thought that it would be. So obviously I have to work with staff on finding those staff liaisons, but I wanted to get your input. If any of you have any ideas of staff that you would like to see as the liaisons to your individual working groups, I'd love to hear that now. Yeah.
Commissioner Calvert.
Yeah, so we've been working with Jenny Petoskey and occasionally Sarah Mason. So if that still works for Jenny, I think that makes the most sense for the circular economy group.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Curtis.
Sure. When I look at the list on natural features, some of it falls under NAP and some of it clearly isn't NAP. So could we, once we get combined with pollinators, could we have, one staff contact for one set of items, another staff contact for another set of items? Would that make sense?
Yeah, potentially. And another option is to have someone kind of like I am for the entire commission, who you would reach out to when you have staff requests, and then they would find the appropriate staff person if it's not them. So we could find one person who could handle most of it maybe, and then
Okay.
they could direct you to someone else.
Commissioner Graham.
The Natural Features Committee has typically had multiple staff working with us. The city forester, systems planning folks, most particularly Jerry Clark originally, and then gosh, I don't know why his name escapes me, but we've had we've even had planning staff working with us, and if they're going to be the locus of anything to do with natural features, they need to be working with us directly. So they're well informed. We've had NAP. Dave Borneman was a longtime member, Natural Features Committee. We've had help from the storm folks. Just to be limited to one person whose expertise may not extend deeply into the subject areas is probably not very helpful.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Dish.
I don't know if you're going to be able to hear me because I keep falling off the meeting. I think people have started to watch TV. So my bandwidth is limited, but I think it's really important to work with staff to set the agenda for these working groups, which is what we've been doing in the circular economy group. And obviously there is negotiating involved in this. So it's not just that they dictate, but it really does not work to come up with a project and then look for staff to support it. It is important that the projects that we work on are supporting staff in work that they would like to see done, but do not have the capacity to execute on their own.
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Graham, is your hand up again?
Sorry. The quandary comes, Lisa, when the staff doesn't want to do something that's established policy anymore. Natural features was established as a priority of the city 20 years ago. And just to stop doing it is really not a very good idea.
I don't know why you're saying that it's not being done. As you know, the natural features element of the comprehensive plan is being updated. And the commission has extensive discussion.
Not with our participation, it hasn't been or isn't.
You're not, you are invited to participate, but you can't lead the effort. It is done through state law around how you do participation, and you can't stand in for that participation.
Not public.
I really don't want us to argue this, but I just don't think it is accurate or fair to say that natural features is not being done. And I don't think it's useful. It's not a helpful way to proceed on this commission.
That's definitely the case. Sorry.
Okay, well, we'll perhaps continue that discussion. Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, I just want to say that that's great news that the city is going to fill that environmental coordinator position. And I think because what the water quality group does is it touches many different aspects. I think it would be good if that if that staff person would figure out would be maybe our initial staff support person when they're on board. Other than that, Jen Lawson seems to be the staff member that's mostly involved in water quality issues.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Dish. Did you change your mind to talk?
No, I spoke before without being recognized in response to Commissioner Graham. Sorry.
Okay. Just wanted to respond to your hand. Okay, any other items?
Well, thank you all for that. Obviously, I cannot guarantee that those staff will be the liaisons, but I will reach out to them certainly. The last thing I had was I've been talking and I think it is feasible for us to have a environmental commission SharePoint site that would allow for us to have documents that are view only for the entire commission, and then there would be folders that would be for each working group that you would be able to edit in if you're a member of that working group. I believe that that is feasible. I have to work with IT to see if we can get it up and going, but I wanted to check in and see if that would be of interest to the commissioners.
A central place to share documents sounds like a good idea to me. Is that something to which we can upload documents that we may find, as well as create and edit?
You will only be able to view documents that are for the entire commission. So for our meetings, I will be the only one who can upload and edit those. But in your working group folders, you will be able to upload, create, edit, whatever you want with the documents that are in there.
Okay. That sounds good. Any other comments on that? And if so, if not, I believe that we need to, that first off, I want to say thank you all for this discussion. I think it was useful. We will need to come up with our agenda for the next meeting, so I'll be in touch with many of you, I think. And our next scheduled meeting is July 27th at 7. We are now, our next step is to move to public comment. And so we're back to that statement again. It's an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 922-9696-1644 if you wish to speak. And public comment. City staff will select callers based on whether their hand is raised, and that is based on the entering *9 if you wish to speak and raise your hand. There you go. I think I'm going to not read out all the rest of that. State your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Sean, is there anyone who's available and wishing to make a public comment?
There is no one online.
Okay. With that, I believe since this is a working meeting, we don't need the usual even acclamation to close the meeting. I'm going to declare our meeting adjourned, and I want to say thank you all with being patient with me learning the new job, and I'll see you in a month, if not sooner.
Good job, Rita.